The lack of diversity at Silicon Valley companies has become a national issue. We'll discuss this issue on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. It's becoming all too common to hear about the rising gap between rich and poor in the U.S. and to get frequent updates on whether the unemployment rate is lessening or growing. It's always been assumed that the higher the education you have, the better the job you can get. But are there other barriers that get in the way? On this show, my guests and I will talk about what some of these barriers are and what is being done to reduce them. To my left is Dr. Joseph Bryan, Jr., who is the Northern California coordinator for the Rainbow Push Coalition, the national organization led by the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Dr. Bryan serves as a liaison to Reverend Jackson, and he also serves as a life coach, counselor, and mentor to professional teams, athletes, and their families. Dr. Bryan is leading the Rainbow Push Silicon Valley project. Edmund Harris is seated on my right. Mr. Harris is an engineer and the CEO of BABA Educational Services in Menlo Park. He was a member of the Minority Engineering Advisory Board at UCLA, and he served as a reader of college applications for the University of Berkeley. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, welcome to the show. Now, I said at the top of the show in my introduction that it's always been assumed the higher the education you have, the better the job you'll get. Is that still true?
Well, again, thank you for having us on the show tonight. What we have been unfortunately made aware of is that that's not always the case. Over the past several months, Reverend Jackson and the Push Coalition have been doing due diligence with research in this area. Silicon Valley is a world changer because of the phenomenal technology and the various industry that booms out of this wonderful part of our state. And yet we found through our research, through the demographic breakdowns of the participants at executive levels, on board of directors, decision-making and management positions, that racial minorities are not represented in an appropriate fashion or in proportion to the numbers that are engaged in the boom in technology around social media and all the other wonderful gadgets that we take advantage of as a part of our everyday life now. And so Reverend Jackson made it a priority, and Rainbow Push is now engaging ourselves in full bore to ensure that the conversation is engaged. And so tonight's conversation and discussion means a whole lot to us. To be able to also look at the numbers and then begin to have a dialogue about what can we do to make the difference.
All right. Now, does what Dr. Bryan said kind of correspond to what you've seen in your experience?
You know, yes, that's always true. I mean, nepotism and other factors exist, you know, in any organization, in any situation. But I do feel that the skill sets that a person possesses, you know, allows you to perform that job. If you lack the skill set, you cannot perform the job. I mean, I wouldn't put anybody in a nuclear plant handling waste that didn't have the skill set to do that, because he or she, you know, is my brother or my friend or, you know, a friend of a friend. I think that that person has to have the correct skill set, you know, and that's important.
So is it a matter of skill set that is the major factor in not seeing the minorities in numbers at the corporations?
Obviously, these positions that we speak of require a certain level of capital in terms of what you bring to the table.
Yes.
You have to have capacity in order to function at these
Yes.
executive levels, and the education and all the other prerequisites that go along with the requirements to be in those positions. What we have discovered is that there are qualified candidates. The lack of candidates has not been the problem. We've discussed the processes with several of these companies. We've had meetings with HP, and we've met with top leadership at Google and Facebook, and we know that there are various organizations that are used in order for them to grasp the talent, a pool of talent that may be available to them. And many times those talent pools that they go to do not reflect the wider scope of diversity that Northern California reflects.
Now, have you had any problems? You work with students all the time. When they graduate, for example, as a reader at the University of Berkeley or sitting on the board of minority engineers, the advisory board, have you seen problems where qualified people were not selected? Qualified minorities were not selected?
That exists. That exists. There's no denying that exists. But on the opposite side, I've seen readiness on the part, and my emphasis and concern is the preparation that the person has to do and the experiences that they have to have in order to secure one of those positions. I think internships are very important, for not only high school but college students. Internships allow you to get in and have some kind of mentorship as to what it takes to perform a particular task. So when you leave that corporation, you can go back and prepare, receive the educational services that you need in order to be ready for that job. And at the same time, it allows some kind of comfort. And when I say that, as a reader for UCLA and for UC Berkeley, I've seen students and I've seen applications where a student applied and there was a choice between the students. The choice was a student that may have had straight A's, but didn't have any experience. And I've seen a student that took a job as a data entry clerk or something of that nature, and how they were called back during holidays and they moved up, and the next thing you know, they were programming and doing analysis. Now, I have two candidates in front of me, and I'm looking at the one that's judging, because the university, its thing is to select winners because it puts feathers in their caps, if you want to say that. Obviously, the student with had a lower GPA but had that experience was a choice. And the same thing happens in medical school, or any other kind of field, that if you have that experience, that internship experience where you actually try to stay in that field. Mm-hmm.
How did this whole issue come up for Rainbow Push?
Well, the issue has come up because as Reverend Jackson continues to keep his finger on the pulse of what's going on in our country and in our world, the economic explosion in the technology areas and the IPOs and all of the debt offerings that have come up in 2012, 11, 12, and 13 drew his attention very strongly, that there were billions of dollars, millions of dollars, large numbers of debt offerings and various IPOs that were being released based in this area. And so because of his desire to see what the effect on the ground was, our teams at Chicago headquarters for Rainbow Push, as well as Lyle Butchwing, our national political coordinator here in California, began to do research on the numbers and to see how many minorities were part of the debt offerings, and we saw none. And how many of the offerings were given at a time when there was a public release that made it available to minority. Go ahead.
Well, finish your sentence.
No, I was going to say that the wider scope of not only the economic boom of the IPOs and the debt offerings, and then coupling that with the decision making and the lack of minorities at decision making levels.
For those who might not know,
yes,
what's a debt offering?
Well, in order for me to truly do my due diligence, I think it's important to take a couple of steps back. The large companies that we're targeting, just so that the audience is aware as well, we're looking at Apple, Hewlett-Packard, Google, Oracle, Microsoft, eBay, IBM, Twitter, and Facebook. And these companies have been generating millions of dollars in their various growth and development as Silicon Valley companies. And over time, there are opportunities for investors, there are opportunities for partners, there are opportunities for companies to share in the advancement and development of these wonderful companies, and to be on the front end of the reaping of the harvest that comes about as a result of their rapid growth. And so when these opportunities have arisen, there have not been a reflective pool of minority inclusion, businesses, small businesses, corporations, and or individuals that are brought to the table to be offered the opportunity to participate, and hence they are not in a position to receive the residual effects of the debt offerings. And even to the extent, and this is go back to what Mr. Harris was saying about the qualifications, I think that oftentimes the conversation of the offerings, the conversations of when monies are going to be available, how to invest, how to engage in becoming a front-end participant in building a company. Those conversations aren't generally had with minority organizations and community-based groups or the community itself. And so many times information is not available. Inclusion is not pursued. And I love your example about the two candidates, and one being one who has the experience and has done some work as an intern, and one that has not. We've discovered that these companies have not, on a consistent basis, had internships and opportunities for the individuals who are qualified to have that first step into the organization. So we're talking about those minority companies and individuals who have the resource and the opportunity to invest and to be a part of the company at a corporate level, to be participants in the various growth and boom of the millions and billions, and on the ground level of students that just want to get their foot in the door as an intern. And
before I ask you why you think this is the case, I would like to give Edmund a chance to respond in terms of what
I agree with him, and I think that we're talking about two different things. Like with my approach, see, he's talking about lack of diversity at this high level within the corporation, and as he said, I'm talking about the entry level and an acquisition of skills that are necessary to reach those levels. So those types of entry levels, are acquired through, work in the field and knowledge. And I understand fully what he says, because at the top, 9 times out of 10 is this good old boy, network where everybody knows everybody, and it's friendships, and it kind of passes around within the circle, and knowing that there are skill sets like, analysis and ability to do certain types of work, or if not to do the type of work, to surround yourself with folks that can do the type of work that you need to have done.
Absolutely.
So we're talking diversity at 2 levels, at this high level and at the entry level and the participatory level. So I think it's important.
Absolutely. So looking at it at the higher level right now, assuming that people have been prepared at the level, at the entry level, why then do we not see them at the level where you're talking about?
Well, that's part of Reverend Jackson's question and inquiry. His visits here to Silicon Valley in the past couple of months have been to ask those questions, to sit in the boardrooms, to sit with high-level executives and have those conversations. We've also participated in shareholder meetings, and will continue to do so when these companies have their shareholder meetings. And our desire is to ask that question with those that are in decision-making power and positions of authority that can give us some answers as to A, why has this not happened previously, and B, is it on your radar to begin to happen, and C, how can we assist in the process of ensuring that diversity is really a priority? Because at this juncture, and this is what Reverend Jackson has been holding before each of the groups that we presented, even in our luncheons and community gatherings, that currently Hewlett-Packard has at their executive level, or their C-level, they have 12 individuals, and there are 3 white women and 9 white men. And on their board of directors, there are 10 individuals, and there are 7 white men and 3 white women. No people of color represented at all. Google, 13 total execs. There is 1 African-American man and 1 woman and 1 Indian man, and then there are 10 white men that make up the rest of the execs. But on the board level, it's 8 white men, 3 white women.
And what positions were these people in when they were selected? Great
question. And I think that's where this part of our engagement incorporates Mr. Harris's, desire to see preparation take hold, that individuals do have the training, the experience that they need to be ready for positions of this nature. And so these individuals, many of them obviously have had the kind of high quality education that's offered in this area. We're right here on the back door of Stanford University. You see Berkeley, very, very highly sought educational facilities that offer a high level of education.
Were these owners of businesses? Were they heads of companies?
They were not all heads of companies. They were not all owners of businesses. As was shared earlier, a lot of times once an individual gets in the door and begins to work their way up, their performance begins to shine. And we want to have the doors opened for the opportunity to be initiated. And then we also want to ensure that once the higher level opportunities begin to be presented, that minorities are included to be able to be represented. I mean, I could go down the entire list, but you see the numbers are reflective of a lack of diversity. And the other challenge that happens is that if there aren't individuals making decisions that are aware of and or sensitive to a more diverse, balanced scale of inclusion, then the old boy network, as you alluded to, is easy to fall into, not necessarily in a negative, but if I'm not aware of anyone other than those I know, then I won't be open to opening more doors for others that are not like me.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you on any of that, but at the same time, I have to look at the vision and the mission of that corporation. Mm-hmm. And that the vision and the mission of that corporation defines the needs at the executive level. It defines the needs at the board level. I was just participating in I'm on the board of a couple of groups. And if it's a social justice issue, to me, it seems like someone from, say, the University of California, San Diego, Thurgood Marshall College there, has been trained in social justice, and all their curriculums were geared towards addressing social justice issues. So acquisition of knowledge and knowing that exists becomes important. But I understand exactly what he's saying. But again, I go back to the fact that the lack of diversity exists in 2 levels. It exists at the executive level, and it exists in the body. The executive level is the top 1% or 2%, but 99 or 95% of those positions, and most of them are high-paying positions, are in that meaty part.
Yes.
Edmund said something that was very interesting. He said that an organization's mission and its objectives kind of dictate whom they're going to have on the board. So how do you respond to that?
We are fully aware that every organization has its own makeup of what its core values, their mission statements, their visions, their goals. And even within the framework of those particulars, the reality is that there are candidates of color.
Yes.
That
No
could
doubt.
fulfill
No doubt.
whatever those requirements are. And so that is really the crux of the issue is whatever the requirement is, whatever the stipulations are, whatever the framework is, there are minorities, there are people of color, there are more women that could fulfill those positions.
Kind of like Jackie Robinson breaking into baseball.
And at some point, yeah,
So
the
you
breaking of the barriers,
mentioned
yes.
you mentioned people of color. Some people would say, well, you have Asians like East Indians, they're people of color. So when you talk about people of color, who are you talking about?
We are talking about the historically marginalized individuals that are a part of this particular country's history. And generally, the dominant culture has been Anglo-Saxon, and all those that have come from various other backgrounds, including our Asian brothers and sisters, and those that are of East Indian descent who have a wonderful history of their own. This is not an African American necessity. This is not an African American based reality. All of those are Latino brothers and sisters, those from various other European countries that have not been included in this type of economic boom that this valley has experienced. Anyone that is marginalized or there's a lack of inclusion historically, and now in reality,
Now
those are
you
the
mentioned
individuals that we
from
want to
Europe.
include.
Who would
Yes.
be from Europe?
Well, you know, before we get too particular, because one of the things that we've discovered, and this has been an interesting part of being in California, is that there are lines of ethnic groups that have not always been in the easy check boxes. You know, where years ago, diversity, as it began to become a conversation, even in academia, it was always, you know, it will start off as just black and white, and then it was black, white, and Asian, and then black, white, and Asian, and Latino. And then even from those groups, we had to learn there were differences in our Asian brothers and sisters, you know, obviously between Japan and China, and then Korea and Vietnam, you know. So there are breakdowns in that country. Same thing with our Latino brothers and sisters. There are different backgrounds from various areas. So the same thing is with yours. So I would not want to venture into breaking down all the particulars of the various areas that still exist that can be seen as ethnic minority. But I do find that the dominant culture that we have not so much had to be adversarial with, but had to be realistic about, is that white men have dominated many of the areas that are beneficial in the advances of our country. That has always been a part of our history, and this is not an indictment against, as much as it is an acknowledgement of historical patterns that we want to make sure are not the standard anymore, even if it's subconsciously, as you alluded to, missed that there are other people in the room.
Sure. Any responses or comments?
Thoughts? I can't, disagree with anything that he said. I think that we're talking about two different things. We're talking about this top 1%, but then we got this 99% over here. That top 1% is making $10,000 an hour, but this other group over here is kind of like the minimum wage. They're fighting for this $10 an hour, and my concern is for the whole.
Yes.
So
is ours.
So yeah, and again, I look at fundamental things, and I know that there's going to be attrition in anything, in any organization. That there's going to be people leaving the board, and they have to be replaced. So what do I say to a person? I say that your math skills are important. That your ability to create an algorithm is key.
Absolutely.
Because if you can't create an algorithm, that means you can't translate your thoughts into a workable equation.
That's right.
So your math skills become critical, and I'm saying that in terms of making a plan. Like if a person has a lifelong plan, we have to work that plan and get them to the point, and knowing that there's already folks that are there, but we have to deal with attrition as well, and I'm concerned about that.
This is something that I really appreciate about your work as well as your passion. When Reverend Jackson was here, even though the press covered many of his dealings at the Facebooks and HPs of the world, we spent several days on the Stanford campus talking with students.
Yes.
And meeting with the Stanford president and talking about the effect of the student body as it pertains to this issue. And Reverend Jackson, I so appreciate his desire to touch people where they are and to speak to those students about their hopes, their dreams, their goals, and to hear their stories and some of their siblings or other students that have graduated and some of the challenges they had coming out of school and the need base and the student loan debt and all these other things that become a part of where they end up after they graduate. So we spent quite a bit of time at Stanford. We even visited talking with students.
A diversity of students?
Yes.
Or primarily minority students?
We spoke with all students, but we had a specific focus with minority students, given the issue that we're trying to address.
Now, you had mentioned Reverend Jackson being out here at the East Coast, and we have several pictures of him when he visited East Palo Alto. And so I would like to have you tell me, and that's one of the photos, and you're sitting there beside him. I don't know if you can see yourself now. It was a room full of people in the East Palo Alto City Hall, and we can see another photo that would be another cross section of the people, some of the people who were in the room. Why did Reverend Jackson visit Stanford? I'm sorry, East Palo Alto. You made it clear why you visited Stanford.
East Palo Alto is a very special city. Being from California, being a native Californian, I'm aware that it's a new city relative to many of the cities throughout Northern California. And we had an opportunity to speak with several members of the East Palo Alto City Council and to hear of the challenges in that city, to hear of the difficulties that are an ongoing reality as it pertains to economic stability, education, and access to resource, and to know that we could throw a rock from the city council chambers over the plane to Facebook. There's just something that is incongruous about that.
Well, we could also say in terms of East Palo Alto, it's one of the most diverse cities on the peninsula in the Bay Area, and it's also has a population with some of the lowest incomes. That service as gardeners or nurses or maids. And
Right. So to that end, to have on one end the wonderful Silicon Valley, quote unquote, economic engine, and then to have in the heart of it East Palo Alto, it just seems to be an imbalance. And we wanted to speak, and Reverend Jackson wanted to speak to the constituents of the city, to the leadership of the city, to the community-based organizations, to some of the community leaders, and to let them know that they wouldn't be forgotten in this conversation, that his heart is always for the least of these and those that are marginalized, and to be in the vicinity of such economic strength and then to have such economic struggle is an imbalance that Reverend Jackson wanted to make a priority in this engagement. And so having the conversation, inviting the leadership to the table to hear their concerns, to say to them, we're here because we want to make sure that you're not forgotten, that we are speaking a language and utilizing priorities that would benefit this city, that would benefit those that you know that are in need of access to internships and educational resources, and finding out about the school districts and different things that are such a challenge ongoing, and the lack of job mobility that seems to exist, even with all of these companies, so close by. And so that was a very meaningful time. And we did that before we did the other meetings because we wanted to hear the voice of the community first.
Well, I'll ask you about some of the other meetings, but before doing that, if you could talk with Reverend Jackson, and I don't think Edmund, you were at that meeting.
No, I wasn't.
What would you request of him as he talks either to city officials or talks at Stanford to educational institutions, talks to AP shareholders?
Keep up the great work. You know, he's a fraternity brother of mine. We were in the same chapter, so
Here we
you know,
go.
I know him.
There you go.
I know him. You know, one of my good buddies.
Small
and him,
world, huh?
One of my
No doubt
good
about
buddies. One of my good buddies went to Lebanon with him when the black pilot that went down in Lebanon
Yes.
years and years ago.
Ah, yes.
And Jesse went to pick him up. You know,
Yes.
and my good friend Gene Wheeler. I guess they grew up in South Carolina together. But anyway, I would say to him, keep up the good work. And I think that there's two things that have to happen. Just you have to remain aware of the situation and fight the situation. But at the opposite end, which is where I am right now, I need to work to prepare those people, folks of all color.
That's right.
To get to that point. You know, like, you know, we talk about the community college and situation. Right now, about 25% at the most of minorities, people of color, are matriculating out of remedial classes into college level algebra, which is where you're going to get the algorithms and master those types of things. So my thing is, again, working on that end in terms of preparation. Keep doing what you're doing. You know, it's critical, but I'm doing what I'm doing on the opposite side, so you can say, I told you so. See, they're here.
Well, it's great we have both ends covered right here at the table.
It is, and I look at the fact that Reverend Jackson, because of his profile and because of his position, is able to have these conversations at that end.
Right.
And yet, it's always important for him, and that's why we had the luncheon in the first place, to talk with the other end, because that's where his heart is.
That's what it's
even though his presentation has to be on that end, his heart is always on the other end, and it's sensitive to the need. As a matter of fact, we even visited Menlo Atherton High School, I believe it was. While we were here.
Went there.
Did you really?
And there's some issues there too that need to be addressed on this end that exist at that end.
And that's exactly, and that was indicative of how we wanted to engage in this entire project, and so that was a very meaningful part of our visit while we were here as well.
Well, before I ask you to share some of that, why it was so meaningful, I'm going to ask you to talk about what happened the day after you met at that luncheon in East Palo Alto. I know you went, Reverend Jackson went to the HP shareholders meeting and had an opportunity to be one of the shareholders to talk with Meg Whitman and mention the whole issue of diversity to her. And she said, we can talk about this.
That's right.
Did that meeting happen? And if so, what was the outcome?
There have been ongoing dialogue. There's been ongoing dialogue. Meg Whitman was very open to a conversation and ongoing conversations with Reverend Jackson. I am aware that they are planning an additional meeting in Chicago upcoming. They're working on logistics and those kinds of things. Reverend Jackson was able to share from that end of the spectrum the needs and the various lack of inclusion that exists. And her response has been very open, as well as one of the things I appreciate about someone, and she's one obviously because of her profile publicly that was mentioned that he would be talking with. There have been several others that we've had those quiet conversations with, like at a table like this. And one of the things that we appreciate is that if individuals realize that we're not here, and Reverend Jackson's objective is not to bring about conflict, but to bring about collaboration. That opens the door to have a conversation.
Embracing.
And once we are clear that we want to help expand the conversation, one of the conversations we had that next day, again, much of this we weren't able to share publicly, but one of the conversations we had for over an hour with a top leader in one of these companies that we've named. They were so grateful that we brought some light to things that they weren't aware of or hadn't thought about because it just hadn't crossed their minds.
And why not?
Because
I mean, for us, some things are obvious.
Right. If you only play baseball, you don't think about a fast break because that's basketball. That's a different game. There's nothing wrong with a fast break, but a fast break is different than a fast ball. And a fast ball is baseball. If all you think about is baseball and all you're around is baseball people, you don't know that a fast break
in perspective
is a good thing. And so until you're introduced to a fast break, you don't know that it's a good thing. And so what Reverend Jackson is able to do is introduce fast breaks or introduce other things. And in this case, it's something that's very obvious, as you say, to us, but it's not as obvious to others. And that's why the conversation always has to be just that we are here to present information and give light to a scenario, a situation, a part of the problem that you may not be aware of, because in your scheme of operation, your functionality, your means of doing however you need to do to run your business, you may not be aware that these are other things that exist.
Now, Edmund has put a lot of stress on the 99%.
Yes.
And we know very well the jobs at the top on boards, or those positions, those seats, are limited. And there is the issue of scarcity. And not everybody is going to make it, even if they're equally qualified. And the idea with this concept of scarcity is that if one person gets the seat, then that denies the seat to somebody else who might be equally qualified. So when you talk to companies, when you talk to educational institutions, how do you deal with that issue of inclusion and their scarcity and limited seats available?
Yeah, you know, one of the things, especially at UCLA, that I did, you know, I advocated for people, like, even, you know, through admissions, you know, why this person should be admitted. And I like the comprehensive review process, because what you do is you look at the person holistically, you look at their personal development, you know, development outside the classroom. That's where their internships and the activities and their leadership skills are exhibited. And then you look at the academics, but also you look at the life challenges that that person had to face in order to accomplish what they did. So in terms of advocating for a person, you know, I mean, I had to look at it and I had to say, hey, look what this person came from, look where they got to, and these two are the same. Which one am I going to take?
That's right. That's right.
You know, which one holistically has the fire in them and has the drive and has the thirst
Well,
to get there?
which one, too, will fit in
Which one, too? You're right.
in the culture,
In the culture,
of the institution?
and contribute.
Right. And I think the words you just used, advocate and advocacy, is exactly the answer, or at least a significant part of the answer to why diversity at the top is necessary. Because you are in a position to review applications and to review files and to review qualifications. And because you were in the position, advocacy could happen. And so, again, when the positions are available at the top, or someone like us is at the top, then we can pay attention to things that may have been missed in other cases.
No, some people would say people select people like themselves.
Yes.
Because they're people.
Good old boy.
Yes. And at the same time, what's the difference between what you're saying in terms of advocacy? Sitting there and selecting somebody to diversify the institution who might look like you?
I think that diversity is critical. I think the makeup of this country is changing, and I think that the products and services that any corporation offers is changing who your market is. And when your market participants see that you aren't diversifying, or you don't understand the culture of that particular market, You need to know. You need to find out. So you got to have somebody there that's in touch, that's connected to that. And I'm not saying that everybody remains connected, because sometimes people lose their identity. But I think that, you know, you got a better chance of sustaining yourself as a corporation if you maintain diversity, just in terms of, you know, who you're marketing to.
And with that said, just to kind of piggyback really quickly before you add more, I think that's why the question that you asked about, is this the same thing happening at this level? And the reality is that it's not a good old boy, quote, network, as much as it is an awareness that may not exist if we're not at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why your mission and vision becomes important.
What's important to a company, any company, is the bottom line. And who is going to add to that bottom line.
Sure.
And when you go to companies with hat in hand, and are you going to companies with hat in hand saying, give me, we want a piece of the action? What's the attitude when you go to companies and say, we want a piece of the pie?
We don't ask for a piece of the pie, we ask for a seat at the table.
Where you can eat a piece of the pie.
Well, where you can compete to get your slice. I think that it's not a request for a handout as much as it is an opportunity that may not have existed until said companies, individuals, or leaders are reminded that this is really important. One of the things, the last things that Reverend said at the HP shareholder meeting, he wanted to know, is diversity important to you? Back to your comment. Is this important to you or not?
Yeah, you know, and you know, as an engineer, you know, I worked on an airplane, MD-12. It never flew. We were going to build a 700-passenger airplane. And what we were doing when we were looking at that, it was twofold. You know, we were looking for partners, but we knew that a big plane like that was going to fly across, you know, the Pacific Rim. So, you know, you look for 9 times out of 10, the people that are going to buy the plane were going to be in Asia, we're going to be in Europe. So you look for those partnerships where you could bring some income to that. And I think that was the turning point in my life. When I left and I got out of engineering, I said to myself, well, we got to have some skill sets, because I was living in Los Angeles and I'm driving down Slauson and I see all these empty buildings where, you know, there's nothing there. And I'm looking at the community and I'm saying, you know, I just left China and they had 10,000 engineers ready to go, ready to go. And then I go through South Central and I'm saying, there's not 10,000 engineers here. What do we have to do?
Exactly.
To get those 10,000, and that's when I decided that I needed to do something in education.
At the other end of it.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Now, I had mentioned in introducing you that there is the Rainbow Push Silicon Valley project.
Yes.
What is it?
It is a project to diversify the valley at both ends of the spectrum, offering opportunities and access to the plethora of resource and advancement that's a part of Silicon Valley. And so it's a wide scope that has specific pieces that incorporate community engagement, incorporate the clergy community, incorporate the educational institutions, and incorporates an ongoing conversation as well as preparation so that we can actually participate in the benefit of this growing and continuing expanding industry known as Silicon Valley.
Has it rolled out yet?
It has rolled out, and one of the things that we have not done because we didn't feel it was appropriate or priority, we did not want to have a big celebration, launch, announcement kind of thing. We wanted to come in, roll up our sleeves, and get to work. And so
that's cool.
we didn't want the fanfare. We didn't want a press conference announcing that this is what we're doing. We wanted to come into the community and begin rolling up our sleeves and begin making the calls and contacts at the top level, maintaining connections with the community and community-based organizations, having relationships with clergy groups and CBOs, and finding out about education, and making sure that we are aware of the needs on both ends and continue to press forward together.
Okay, now, Edmund stressed that you have to have a plan.
Yes.
And so before I ask you what the plan is,
yes,
I'm going to ask you, when you talk about having a plan and giving a plan to the 99%, what does that involve?
Got a lot of friends, and they always say if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So the plan is, like to me, what he's saying is rolling up your sleeves, getting the right people at the table, because there needs to be an identification of, through brainstorming and planning, the most immediate impact that you can have, so you can determine that they're winning, that you're fighting a winning situation, because you want a win-win up front to be a movement. So it's like rolling your sleeves up and finding out, what do we need to do? And if it involves like, first of all, bringing those board people, the ones at the top, to the table, and making them cognizant of the situation, but at the same time, on the back end, you know that you need to have the ready pool, so you identify that pool of people. So when I'm saying making a plan, I'm saying you create action items, but the action items are interlinked.
That's right.
That you have to work them all.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So
he just gave the plan. Nothing else for me to say.
I just looked at, I just heard those components.
That's
Are those the same?
That's exactly.
I mean, you both have rolled up your sleeves.
We have identified, and first of all, we invited, as well as we identified, individuals that are passionate about this issue, and really, the project here for Rainbow Push didn't just start. Reverend Jackson and Rainbow Push had been engaged in this area over 10 years ago. And many of those relationships, many of those contacts have been maintained. And so we have re-engaged many of our cohorts in this area. And we have had, as you recall, the luncheon that you mentioned. We're having another gathering similar to that this month. We're going to be meeting with clergy this month. We've met with individual city council members over the past 2 months since Reverend was last here. And so we're having those conversations, because one of the things we do not want to do, we don't want to stampede over any work that's already happening. We want to get an appropriate lay of the land and an assessment of what's already working. There are some very strong advocacy groups that exist in this area already, and we want to be a partner with them and not a problem for them. And one of the things that Reverend Jackson is able to do, obviously, because of his position, he brings a lot of attention when he arrives, but he also brings a lot of motivation for those that are actually doing the work.
No, you mentioned advocacy groups. Like which ones?
I'm not at liberty to share, because if they have been quietly operating behind the scenes this long, it's not for me to announce them now. But please know that we've done our homework, we've done our due diligence, and anytime we meet individuals like yourselves, I mean, we've been in conversation, emails and different things. Just I wanted to know, what you're doing and how you're doing it, and I'm honored to be invited to be on the show. But I'm just so impressed with the messaging that you continue to project through your vehicle. I'm just so inspired by what you've been saying about education and about the need to ready our students for the opportunities that will exist before them. One of the things that we said to Facebook in a meeting with them, because young people love Facebook and they're on Facebook, we talked about training them to be involved at the next, not just getting on and taking pictures, but what's going on with the technology of getting these images out. What type of electrical training or technology background you need, and then there's another wing of this. Since it's a social media entity. What is going on with your own HR and your own marketing plan? There's so many other things that are a part of the reality that we don't want to miss. And we had a wonderful conversation just about how to integrate those that have been left off the list or left out of the conversation. How do we incorporate them to be a part of this industry? Maybe they don't have the background in mathematics, but they are whiz at doing marketing and other things.
And I was going to say that too, because there's a lot of tracks that lead to those executive positions, those leadership positions. You have financial services, you have marketing, you got human resources, you got administration. There's a lot of tracks, and like in their vision, that the leader of those companies know that a corporation is failing in a particular area, so they're going to pick folks that are masters, if you want to say that, in those particular areas, those particular tracks. So, I agree with you 100%. I mean, my awareness might be on the technical side, but on the administrative side, I know, because when we were doing that airplane, the MD-12, when we were looking at developing it, we had to look in creating the business plan and the manufacturing development plan. We had to look at all the tracks and what we needed in terms of the types of individuals. And there's accountants, there's all kinds of folks that go into that.
Before we talk about specific events, the one thing that concerns me after talking with the two of you and getting to the stage where we are, training that 99%, getting the door open, getting the opportunities, getting them in the door. It's one thing to get there, and it's another thing to stay there.
Absolutely.
And once people get there, I mean, that's another kind of level, key, critical.
Very.
For being pushed out. And that there is the whole political culture that they have to deal with. There's the whole supportive system. So, have you considered that, and what's being done about it?
We have considered it, even with those that are currently in positions. We have relationships with the handful of minorities that are currently in exec positions and board positions. We have relationships with them, and the relationships with them are for that very reason. We want them to know that we support them. We're here to hear their needs, their concerns, their issues, and sometimes because of what you mentioned, which you alluded to, they just need an outlet to strategically see how to best fit in situations that may have been pre-existing or may be challenging for their sustainability. I think on the heels of this month's visit to this area by our president, I think even in what we have seen with him being an African-American man in the highest office in the country, there have been attacks against him that are a part of the ongoing reality of his day-to-day operation. And so I think it continues to happen anytime minorities, people of color, those that have been marginalized, are elevated based on their merit, mind you, based on qualifications that they deserve to be in those positions. There are still those attacks, there's still the undermining, there's still some very real issues that happen to those individuals, and we want to be able to stand in the corner as their cheerleaders and continue to ensure that they're being treated fairly and rightly and justly in those positions.
Well, yes.
It's kind of, and I agree with you. It's kind of like crabs in the barrel. It gets vicious up there. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That everybody wants to be there.
Right.
And if I can get one up on you and pull you down, I got your spot. And
that's the scarcity there, or that feeling of scarcity. It's me or you.
And if you have, I like to say, some soldiers. If you got some people around you that got your back, And maybe that's part of the reason why that good old boy in this work
Right.
exists, because they know they got somebody that has their back.
I hear your heart, because even earlier when you referred to you and Reverend's connection, which I think is just fantastic, the Rainbow Push Coalition is just that. It's the soldiers.
Yeah.
It's the group that has your back, and to be able to know that there are individuals, because even at this level there are some leaders that don't realize that there are other leaders that they can connect with that are of like situation and position. So part of our responsibility is to make sure that these connections are made. And so this entire year, we're going to continue to attend the shareholder meetings, because we believe that the introduction of this conversation is critical, that they understand the serious and the sincerity of this project, and know that we are here because we believe that inclusion and diversity can happen if everyone's willing to come to the table. We're going to continue to have ongoing conversations with those leaders in the communities in Silicon Valley. We have a connection with the Black Chamber of Commerce, and we've talked with Hispanic leadership groups that I'm very excited to be working with, just to find out what the education area here, especially around the high school. You mentioned you have some history with Menlo Avenue. The education, and the after school, the lack of quality after school programs and different things like that. Giving a shout out. I got you.
Yeah, no, he went there, man.
It's there's so many things that need to be made aware of, so that we can really engage with intellect and with precision, and not just coming to make a lot of noise, but really coming to make a difference. And so that's why we're doing this very strategically. A lot of conversations, a lot of
and it's welcome.
A lot of listening, so that we can know. And we've invited, just so you know, and you mentioned events, we've invited from both ends. We've invited leaders from the companies as well as members of the community to the Rainbow Push Coalition National Conference that's going to be in Chicago, June 28th through July 2nd. And some of the leaders that we've alluded to have agreed to either come or send their representatives to begin to have some of the conversations that you mentioned about, this is where we are, this is how we got here, and we want to be more aware of including a wider scope and putting out the net further to include others. And we have our youth component that's going to be participating in events with the VPs of these various companies and beginning to learn what it takes to get there. And so that's a part of how the Rainbow Push Coalition can begin to make a significant difference.
And you probably have youth groups that you're working on.
Yeah, even though like what he was talking about, like when we had that, when I was with the Minority Industry Engineering Advisory Board at UCLA, see, it was a group like Verizon and Raytheon and all these different companies that were supporting students, like what he said, to enter into those positions. And they were executives, and we did the same thing. Chevron and the other ones were at the table. This is not Silicon Valley. I don't know what exists up here. I'm just talking about LA. But it's critical. I mean, it's key. And again, like I say, that mentorship, like I know when I came out of school in engineering, I didn't know nothing about it. I didn't know anybody that was an engineer. I didn't know anything about it. There was nobody I could talk to. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to perform? How am I supposed to act? Back then. But now, when a young person comes and I talk to them, I can tell them, hey man, let me tell you, I've been there, done that, and we can share. And if you got people in the industry that are willing to do that with the youth in that conference,
that's right,
it's helpful.
That's right.
Well, it's great to know we can sit around the table. There isn't any pie, but we can say we've done that, we've been that, we've discussed it. And I certainly appreciate having the opportunity to have the two of you here to talk about what's going on that might very well change the corporate environment in which things are operating.
Absolutely.
It's going to change. It's got to change.
So I'd like to...
It's not a revolution. It's not evolution. It's a revolution.
So thank you so much for sharing the evolutionary changes. I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.